Here it is, guys. Our final review of Wishkeeper. This exotic has been in our hands for a month now, and we finally have all the intrinsic upgrades and all of its exotic catalysts. Now, if you're looking to unlock all of these yourself, there will be links down below for our guide or guides, considering this was a time-gated quest that occurred over 4 weeks. But today, though, we break Wishkeeper down in its entirety. I said back then that the fourth and final exotic catalyst would be the selling point of this exotic. So on that note, let's quickly cover the exotic, its base functionality, and then narrow down on what the god roll is for this craftable exotic bow. Now, its exotic perk, Snare Weaver, reads that precision hits and final blows build energy toward a Snare Weaver arrow that can be fired from the hip. On impact, Snare Weaver arrows create a pattern of traps that suspend nearby targets. Now, this perk, and pretty much the bow as a whole, is very similar to Hierarchy of Needs in terms of its mechanic usage. Now, as for building stacks, you can get 1 stack on a precision hit, 2 stacks on a precision kill, and 1 stack for a non-precision kill in PvE. In PvP, the stacks gain change to 4 stacks on a precision kill and 3 stacks for a non-precision kill. Once you've gotten all 6 stacks, your next hipfire shot will be that Snare Weaver arrow, which will create a trap on the ground wherever it lands, made up of connected strand tripwires that suspend targets that touch them. Now, if the hipfire arrow makes direct impact with an enemy, it will suspend that enemy immediately and then proceed to extend the traps outward from that location. Now, without any catalyst enhancing it, we found that the traps last for about 10 seconds in both PvE and PvP. Now, inside of PvP, each suspend lasts for 2 seconds. Inside of PvE, the suspend will last for 5 to 7 seconds, with the longer time coming from our strand subclass fragments. Now, once a target is suspended, the bow's other exotic perk, Silkbound Slayer, will be active. This perk reads, this weapon deals bonus damage to suspended targets. Gain faster draw time for a short duration when you suspend a target from any source, or damage a suspended target with this weapon. Now, looking at the numbers, the bonus damage to suspended targets is an increase of 50% inside of PvE. It's hefty, guys. This is a very nice feeling damage increase. And the purpose of this is that it feeds into its own gameplay loop. Suspend, increase your damage, drop that draw time, and work up those stacks of Snare Weaver even faster. Now, inside of PvP, for my players that do want to use it in PvP, that damage buff is less at 19.74%, giving us a suspended crit damage of 182. So at base, you're not scoring a one-hit crit kill. Granted, there are ways to achieve that. But let me just say this, guys, for my PvP players. For me, this is not a PvP bow. This is a PvE bow. And I just want to get that out of the way. I know there's some of you who are like, Cross, this bow is amazing at PvP. I've tried, guys. It's personally not for me. But again, if you can make it work, by all means, go crazy. Now, the second part of the perk is something we did extensive testing on within our last deep dive of this weapon. The faster draw time granted from suspending targets or damaging suspended targets is a noticeable increase. We're getting about a 53% decrease in our draw time. For instance, if you have the perk Elastic String, which brings our draw time stat down to 612 from 684, once we've procced Silkbound Slayer, we're getting a speedy 23 frames, or roughly 388 draw time, which is fast, super fast. And a reminder here, Silkbound Slayer activates from any source of suspension. This can be done from our own traps, or shackle grenades, or aspects like Ensnaring Slam, or Dringer's Lash. This perk, and weapon for that matter, has clearly been built to run with our strand subclass, as it feeds off of those synergies. And this continues as we now look at all of our catalysts. Now, starting with our first catalyst, we have Enduring Snare Refit. This reads that Snare Weaver traps last longer. Now, this was a bit underwhelming. I know it may seem like it would be the best catalyst, but it increases our trap time by about 5 seconds for a total of 15 seconds. But see, trap time was never really an issue for me. And the issue is that in dense environments, you can only suspend so many targets. Your traps lasting longer doesn't help you here. Now, the second catalyst we unlocked had a bit more potency, called Multi-Threaded Snare Refit, which reads, Snare Weaver traps can suspend more targets. Again, the issue I just mentioned a second ago was that in super dense environments, I actually just wanted my trap to suspend more targets, to lock down an area in its totality. This one's actually pretty good. This perk allows each of our tripwires to activate twice before being consumed. That means if you're in a super, and I mean super dense environments, your trap should be able to activate twice per connection, suspending a total of 24 enemies. The only areas that you can really take advantage of this would be like Battleground Nightfalls. Think like the Moon Battleground, where all those ads are spawning in. That's pretty much it. Everything else, ads do come in from multiple locations and don't really have a singular spawn point. But I do want to mention that bottom line here, this greatly improves our trap's potency. Suspending becomes easier thanks to this catalyst, and the bow feels a bit more intuitive when you know you can rely on your traps just that much more. Now, moving down the line to our next catalyst, we have Vorpal. Now, keep in mind, Vorpal is a 20% buff here, for primary weapons, against mini bosses, vehicles, and guardians in their super. Most notably though, against champions. But here's the thing, I'm not really using Wishkeeper for boss damage, or even for shredding down a champion. Despite its 50% buff, even if you add the 20% to it, it's really not doing that much. I would much rather take multi-threaded snare, or even our last catalyst, which has brought us to this review right here. The fourth and final exotic catalyst is Hatchling. Now, a perk that I know many of you have already seen on legendary weapons, and I know it's a perk that doesn't seem that intriguing. This was the one that interested me the most. Looking at Hatchling Refit, it reads, precision final blows or rapidly defeating targets with a non-precision weapon spawns a threadling at the target's location. Now, this behaves exactly like normal Hatchling, but I was curious about how this interacted with A, suspended enemies, and B, granting stacks on kills. Looking at my first interest, unfortunately, threadlings spawned from Hatchling do not deal increased damage to suspended targets, which is unfortunate. Also, with it being an exotic, I was hoping that maybe the threadlings here would scale in damage, considering exotics do more damage to red bar enemies. But no, that's not the case either. Now, I know this sounds like a double whammy. Exotic catalyst must be garbage cross, but hold up. Threadlings that are spawned by Hatchling will grant us 1 stack whenever they manage to get a kill. As I was using Wishkeeper with this catalyst, I was actually surprised by how often they were getting kills and speeding up to my next trap. That means with this exotic catalyst, from 1 precision kill, you can get half of the necessary stacks for that Snare Weaver trap, as you'll get 2 stacks from the kill, and then 1 if the threadling also scores a kill. Now, it's important to make the distinction that only Hatchling spawn threadlings will count as weapon kills, which is also unfortunate. Hatchling spawn from our subclass, whether that be through our abilities or our fragment Thread of Rebirth, will not give us stacks. I know, I was hoping I could roll in there with a threadling army and constantly have stacks of Snare Weaver traps ready to go. This is unfortunate. And yes, in higher difficulty content, it definitely loses lethality. I like Hatchling simply because I love threadlings. I love building into a threadling army. But Bungie, I really wish we had more synergy here for those Snare Weaver traps. Even if it wasn't a threadling grenade that could give us those stacks, at least let Thread of Rebirth contribute to those stacks. That way I have multiple sources of threadlings going out directly from my weapon. It's not me leaning into abilities or aspects or anything like that. It's purely coming from my weapon. Now, with that being said, I do want to mention that running Strand Surge does increase the damage of your threadlings, which takes us to our ideal crafted Wishkeeper. In our bowstring slot, we have Elastic String, 100%, guys. Drops our draw time down to 612. I know some of you were recommending some other bowstrings, but this is still my favorite. For our arrow perk, I'm running Compact Arrow Shaft. This gives us better handling and faster knock speed with that +10 reload. For our grip, I chose Texture Grip for the large bump and handling, and then for our canvas, I'm still running Hatchling. I know we don't have exactly all the synergy that we wanted, but again, I like threadling armies. And at the end of the day, Hatchling is the only catalyst that increases our general lethality by expediting our stack building. With that being said, I do want to cover some of the synergies out there that you could take advantage of. We tried out a number of builds that you guys suggested yesterday, one being Wishkeeper with Avian Leap and Drinker's Lash, and essentially, the idea was to take advantage of Wishkeeper's buff and fast draw time by constantly suspending targets. We also did a Foe Tracer build, which would really just synergize really well with any strand build, as we were taking advantage of running tangles. But the build that I really settled on being my favorite was, again, building into that threadling army with Hatchling on our Wishkeeper and still using Thread of Rebirth, but also rocking the exotic Swarmers for my Warlocks. This felt really good. We pair it with Mindspun Invocation, and our threadling kills will cause suspending explosions. And with Wishkeeper dealing more damage to suspended targets, this means more kills, which means more threadlings and a whole lot of damage numbers. Tag on our artifact with Unraveling Orbs and Horde Shuttle, and you've got a threadling army here, guys. And keep in mind, Swarmers states that destroying a tangle spawns a threadling, but all threadlings unravel targets that they damage. I know Wishkeeper is not necessarily this DPS powerhouse, but I can't deny the synergy here, guys. Between Hatchling and multi-threaded Snare, I think both of those will serve you well. And if Bungie at any point in the future decides to be a bit more bold and allow Thread of Rebirth and those threadling procs to also contribute stacks, might turn some of us into a Warlock main, right? Guys, if you have some synergy you want to bring up or some builds you want to share, over on our Twitch channel, we have something called Build Battles. You guys can come in, and for 25,000 eggplants, which you get just by watching the stream, you can submit your favorite builds, which will go head to head with someone else's favorite build. And this can change depending on the variety of content we tackle, whether it's trials, comp, Grandmaster Nightfalls, or solo dungeon runs. You can come in and submit your favorite Wishkeeper build, or any build for that matter. So feel free to come by. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.